Geeks and geekettes, and even those of you who are for the first time casually dipping a toe into the well of nerddom that is Ask Chuck Dixon, where you, an average person, from whatever walk of life you happen to trod, get to ask me, a big time comic book professional of 30 plus years in the business. You get to ask me about what I do for a living, and what I do for a living is I write comic books. When I'm not sitting here answering your questions, and hey, bunch of great questions are pouring in. Thank you. The bag was empty there for a while, and now it's filling up. Apparently, there's just an endless cornucopia, an endless plethora, a parade of inquiries that all of you have, and I'm more than happy to sit here and explore them with you. So let's get to Trevin Hickman. I really enjoy your 12-issue run of Richard Dragon. I'm just curious what it was like writing it and how you felt about the series. Well, I like a good kung fu movie. I like a good martial arts movie. And, it kind of, kung fu movies kind of came into the mix when I was in high school. They started bringing over the Hong Kong chopsaki flicks, and they're putting kung fu theater on television and the rest of it. And you could go down to the grindhouse and see 2 or 3 of these things. So, I got into it, got into the whole Bruce Lee thing, and, kind of dug it. And I got to work in the genre a little bit when I got to DC. And I took it upon myself to do a 5-issue arc, a crossover across the 3 of the titles I was writing at the time. And the whole point of it was to finally establish the martial arts hierarchy of the DC universe. So we had all of the great kung fu, hapkido, jujitsu, karate, Krav Maga, whatever master, whatever discipline these characters mastered, they came together to punch and kick their way to the top of the heap in the DC universe. And spoiler alert, it all came down to a battle between Connor Hawke and Lady Shiva, and I won't tell you who won. But it was finally firmly established, at least in my mind, who the biggest badass in empty-hand fighting was in the DC universe. And I don't know if that led to me writing a Richard Dragon series or not. Maybe it wasn't even the minds of the editors. They knew they wanted Scott McDaniel on art, and maybe they just thought, hey, let's put Chuck and Scott together since, they made some noise on Nightwing, so maybe it's a good fit. I'd like to think they turned to me because of my grasp of DC martial arts continuity, but that probably wasn't it. But of course, how did I feel about working on it? It was fun. It was a lot of fun. Getting reunited with Scott McDaniel and doing really these insane action scenes. Scott's one of the few artists that I don't choreograph the fights. I just say, look, this is where it begins. This is how it has to end. These are some of the things they'll say when they're mixing it up. This is the location. Go for it. Next 5 pages, mayhem. And Scott just goes crazy. And so, we had fun on it. My only reservation about it is that I wish they had done something to reintroduce Richard Dragon to the comic book reading audience. A lot of people thought this was a brand new character we were introducing. They didn't understand. He was created by Denny O'Neil back in the 70s. Had, maybe a 1.5 to 2 year run of a title in the 70s when the Kung Fu craze was at its height. And I wish that they had done like a major arc. I wouldn't have had to have been written by me. It could have been done by the regular writers of a Batman title. Because according to Denny, Richard Dragon was one of the people who taught Batman how to fight. So it might have been a good idea to reintroduce the character, bring him back in to continuity through one of the Batman titles, an arc or a special or something before we launched this series, so that readers would know who the hell he was. Only longtime DC fans remembered him, and even amongst those, he was rather an obscure character. So, we ran 12 issues. It did okay, but, sales fell off after a while and I had to cancel it. But I think we could have run, a couple of years if we had some sort of hype or help or marketing to help familiarize the readers with who this guy was and why he was important to the Batman mythos, and maybe even connect him a little closer to Batman. Might have helped. Because as you know, you sell an issue 1 and then the sales slide from there generally. So the more of an issue 1 you can sell, the slower the attrition rate, and the longer a title can get to stick around. But I had fun. I think Scott had fun. It looks like he had fun. Look at that double-page spread. Awesome stuff. Can that guy do perspectives or what? I mean, there's like maybe 18 perspective points on that scene, and then he does a sort of, I don't know. It's his engineering background. Mr. McDaniel has a degree in engineering, and it shows in his art. Danny Brown. It was always confusing to me how you can have multiple running titles that star the same character. If Alfred is injured in Batman, but he's making Bruce's breakfast in Detective, is that not the same Alfred? If Lex Luthor is on another planet in Superman, but in action he's flying around in his supersuit, is that not the same Lex? How do you feel about one character in multiple titles? Well, I think that was the case back in the day, where the two titles didn't necessarily relate. And usually these are all one-off stories, so it really didn't matter. There wasn't a great degree of continuity. But, as we moved into the 80s and 90s, there was a greater emphasis on bringing these titles closer together. We had Batman, Detective, and Shadow of the Bat. And while they ran separately when not involved in crossovers, we paid attention to each other's continuity, so that, as in the instance you point out, if Alfred broke his arm, if Alan Grant wrote that Alfred broke his arm in Shadow of the Bat, we would make sure that Doug and I reflected that we showed Alfred with his arm in a cast or arm in a sling in our issues, and everybody was cool with that. And the Superman titles in particular, the Superman titles were very, very closely drawn together, so that for the years of death of Superman and what followed, and the marriage of Clark and Lois, those titles could all be read as like one huge saga. Stories would run from issue to issue, despite who had written them or who had drawn them. So there was a great effort, particularly at DC, to tighten up that continuity so that we didn't have conflicts. A character being in multiple titles is fine with me, as long as everybody's playing nice and understands that there are readers who are reading all of them and will notice if there's plot holes or duplications or redundancies, or something is missed that shouldn't be. My bigger concern is the kind of, particularly at DC, is the dilution of the characters. I mean, you simultaneously have a TV Flash, a movie Flash, a comic book Flash, a cartoon Flash, and they're all different to one degree or another. There's no real continuity, and we're seeing this more and more at DC. As different actors playing the Joker, different actors playing Batman. The different films have different looks, different emphases, characters used in entirely different ways than they were before. And, if you're just a casual viewer watching these things, I mean, you might be watching a Batman movie and not really care that it's 20 years old, and wondering why it doesn't match the Batman movie you saw last year. How many Alfreds have there been? It gets confusing. I understand, you can't hire an actor to play Alfred for, the next 40 years and it be the same guy and everything else. But the idea of even having different imprints, having a an imprint where there's a darker version of Batman or Superman, and then a kid's version of Batman and Superman, children's books with Batman and Superman in them. It all just, it takes away the specialness, I think. When you think, okay, well, it's just a great big multiverse, and we all understand there's various versions of Green Lantern or various versions of Black Canary, and they don't always have to mesh up because it's the multiverse and who cares. But, it to me, it removes the uniqueness or specialness. It moves comics into the area of fan fiction. And it doesn't seem like the creators and publishers and showrunners and producers are taking these properties very seriously if they think that they can just warp and bend and shape them to their own convenience. So that concerns me a lot more than in comics a character appearing in more than one title every month. Hey, it's a Danny Brown twin spin. Here's Danny again with all your experiences writing stories. Have you ever thought about writing a book where you detail your writing process? You can cover the ABC style of storytelling, story versus plot, plot twist, character development, world building, writing action, writing novels versus writing graphic novels, working with artists, working with a co-writer, etc. We need this book. Well, I don't like to encourage competition, so why should I tell you how I do it? Actually, I look at these videos as this is my way of sharing my quote unquote process. I hate that term process, but it's what it is. It's how my mind works. And I've written articles about how I write. I never wrote a how-to book because I don't like how-to books. Every how-to book I read about writing when I was trying to get into writing was discouraging. Because I would read it and I go, well, I don't think that way, or I don't do that. I don't write every day, or I don't put my ideas down on 3x5 cards or Post-it notes, or I don't, I don't do things other writers do, and every writer's different. Why would I tell you how to write? I can't tell you how to write. You have to find out how you write. You have to find your own quote unquote process. That's all yours. There's no one way to do it. There's no secret. There's no magic. Also, I'm a terrible teacher. We made the decision to homeschool our children. Of course, I was useless as an instructor. My wife did all of it. 3 flashcards and I turned into Homer Simpson. I mean, I never felt dumber in my life than trying to teach, phonics to a 6-year-old. It makes you feel so stupid because it's like, well, I know this. Why can't I impart this to him? And he's not getting it. He's trying, but it's me who's failing. So yeah, I've never had an urge to write a how-to book. The only reason I would write a how-to book is if every other writing opportunity dried up. Man, I got to bring some cash in. I think I'll write a how-to-write book, like all the other people whose work dried up, or all the other people who who have never actually done it, but they're going to tell you how to do it. You see all these how to draw comics and how to write comics, and generally they're written by people who've never done it, or maybe had 1 or 2 projects that got published, and now they're experts. Yeah, I think also the hubris of, being a professor type. It's just not me. But, I might do it someday. As my wife says, never say never. I said I'd never move to Florida. So, Jack Zoo. I know you've already given your opinion on this, but I was wondering what your thoughts are about this comment from one of the developers at Warner Brothers Games made about Tim's sexuality. Tim Drake, I assume we're talking about. When I was growing up reading your stories, Tim was always straight, from what I can remember, and it wasn't a huge issue. Him and Stephanie had a cute teen romance. Yeah, it was never an issue. Sexuality of my characters, when I was writing mainstream superhero books, was never an issue, because it's not what the stories are about. You know, so this is the comment that he wants me to comment on from somebody at Warner Brothers Gaming. Tim is buying the comics, therefore Tim is buying the game. It's not a huge plot point. Then why do it? It's just part of who he is, and this comes up in the character interactions we have in the Belfry. I don't know what the Belfry is. Bats in the Belfry? Oh, come on, please. The Belfry, within the scope of how normal conversations would bring this up. Hey, Tim, how bi are you? That's how, isn't that how these conversations are? Very natural. People always discussing their sexual preferences. Are you dating a boy or a girl this week, Tim? And what about those Yankees? Anyway, other NPCs and characters in the game also offer forms of representation in ways which reflect the world we live in. Well, I see a lot of forms of representation in symbology here on this message, and I don't see a whole lot of diversity there. They seem to be all the same forms of representation. And as far as the world we live in, well, what world does she live in? Where it's normal for people to sit around talking about their sexuality, and people allowing their sexuality to define them. On a recent episode of Gutfeld, this subject came up. It came up about Superman's son being gay, and how the sales crashed, and they basically had to cancel gay Superman's book. And Tyrus, professional wrestler, he told a story about how he was playing the bad guy in some action film. And while they're filming it, the director says, "We've decided your character is gay." And Tyrus said, "Okay, how does that change anything that I do?" And that's really the question, isn't it? It didn't change anything he did. And he goes, why should that be the defining characteristic of my character if we're not ever going to see an example of my gayness? And he said, aren't there other aspects of the character that could be brought forward? Does he like pizza? What's his favorite color? He used a bunch of examples like that. No, the defining characteristic of this character, beyond the fact that he's, an enormous, badass bruiser of a guy, which is what Tyrus would play, is is where he puts his pee-pee, or where he likes to put his pee-pee. It's irrelevant, isn't it? It certainly was probably entirely irrelevant in the movie that he was making. It's primarily an action film. And it's certainly irrelevant in what should be normal, mainstream superhero escapist fare. And I have talked a lot about this subject, and I'll say the same thing that Tyrus said, actually, the same point I've made over and over again. If you want to write a gay, a bi, a lesbian, an asexual character, create a new one. Stop taking established characters, long established characters, which millions of readers have a relationship with, who have related with, who thought that they understood, who thought that they got, and then altering them in a way that changes the perception of those characters. Stop taking the easy route of characters that are already beloved and trying to make them your own. Create your own characters. Do the hard work. It is hard. It's hard creating new characters. It's even harder getting new characters noticed. But if your mission is so important, and your message you believe is so important, and reflecting the quote-unquote world we live in is so urgent to you, then make up your own stuff. It can be done. We're seeing an explosion of independently created characters. They're not even created by publishers. They're being created by individual creators, and they're doing very, very well with them. So do that yourself. Do the work. Put the sweat in. Stop, being a parasite, which is what these people are. Okay. Let's go from the heavy to the light. Hamilton Blues lovers, I noticed you posted a Dilbert comic on your Facebook. What comic strips do you love, past and present? I really do like Dilbert. And I, cartoonist friends of mine, moan and groan because, yeah, Scott Adams isn't that great a cartoonist, but in a way he is, because within his limited range of abilities, he's managed to create this indelible cast of characters that are extremely popular. And the thing I like about the strip most is that it's nuanced, it's intelligent, it's smart, and Adams could have gone the easy route, an I Hate Mondays kind of strip about the working place, but instead he does this sharp, insightful satire on everything related to work and business and capitalism and trade, and comments on what's going on. It's very sharp comments on what's going on in society as a whole, especially as corporations have more and more control over our lives. Dilbert becomes more and more relevant with each passing day. The other thing I like about Adams is he never phones it in. He never milks a joke. A lot of strip writers and strip cartoonists, and you can't blame them, they've got to do 5 dailies and a Sunday, and if they come up with a decent gag, they'll milk it all week long. From Monday to Saturday, it's going to be variations on that same gag. Adams will do a gag until he thinks it's not funny anymore. So he might start a gag on Monday, play a little bit off it on Tuesday, maybe do a final thing on Wednesday, and that's it. He's on to another series of gags or one-shot jokes. And that kind of takes nerve. In fact, there are characters that he has, like Topper, that he only ever brings back because the readers love those characters so much. So Topper is a one-joke character he's one of these guys that say, if you come in on Monday and say, I had a great weekend, we went to the pool, well, Topper went to, Singapore. Topper's always got to top whatever you did. And it's a funny joke every time Adams does it, but if he had his druthers, Topper would have appeared once or twice in the strip and never again. So that kind of dedication to craft and just sheer guts. I also like the way he's got a 3-panel progression in every strip, and I just like the way he builds it. And he's never satisfied with just one gag. Alice's line here, I kind of doubt it in the 3rd panel, would for most strip guys be the final gag. But then he's, the other character's got to get a last word. So it's like ba-dum-dum and then ba-dum-dum-dum. And, like I said, guy never phones it in. As far as strips I love, I was, and I still am as an adult, dedicated to Peanuts by Charles Schulz. One of the greatest American comic strips, and for my money, one of the greatest creations of all time. Schulz takes us into the secret world of children and creates a strip that it's one of the funniest comic strips ever done, but it's also one of the most dramatic in a lot of ways. There's a lot of pathos here, and I always think that for real comedy to work, there has to be pathos under it. It makes it more relatable. If the characters are just goofballs saying funny, jokey things all the time, it's not very enduring. But if the characters have there's a sense of that they experience sadness, frustration, anger, in very real ways, then the strip has legs, or television show has legs, or movie, or whatever. This is why Disney always included, darker elements in his animated features, because kids responded to that. It gave the work weight. And a lot of the stuff in Schulz's work is his own expression of his own thoughts, background, childhood, things like that. Schulz was he was not a happy man. He was a manic depressive. But the one thing he did love was this strip, and he put everything into it. I remember when I was a kid, I was like 7 or 8, and I bought all the Peanuts paperback collections. And I got in an argument with an adult member of our family over Peanuts. And I said, he was saying how rich Schultz was becoming, and that Schultz would eventually be making so much money he would just hand the strip off to someone else, because that's generally what happened in successful comic strips. The original creator would hand it off to someone else. And at 6 or 7, I had the understanding just from reading the strip that this was very, very personal for its creator. And I told this adult relative, you're wrong, that no one will ever draw Peanuts. That when Charles Schultz dies, that will be the end of the strip. And time proved me right. Another strip I like, Leonard Starr's On Stage, or or Mary Perkins On Stage. It's a soap opera strip. It's probably meant for the ladies, but it's so beautifully drawn. And Starr's stories were so engaging. Some of them might be funny, some of them might be a mystery, others action adventure, suspense, gothic stuff, and the standard soap opera stuff, but done so elegantly and free of sentiment, free of schmaltz, and just sophisticated grown-up entertainment in a comic strip. And I really dig it. There's a publisher whose name I think it's Comic Strip Classics, has published the strips, the complete run of these strips, and really gorgeous reproductions. So if you ever get a chance to read it, this is one of the best. This is cream of the crop American comic strip. Another one I really dig, Little Abner. Little Abner was still around when I was a kid and into my early teenage years. And it's a strip I followed. And once again, it's available through Library of American Comics, published by my good buddy Dean Mullaney. You can read the strip up, from its inception up into the 50s. Little Abner was created during the hillbilly phase. There was like this craze in American entertainment for some reason in the 1930s to tell stories about American hillbillies. And Little Abner was born out of that, but soon grew and evolved to be much more than a hillbilly strip, about Rubes and Hicks. It became a satire on American society. And Al Capp, the creator, was an equal opportunity offender. He didn't care what side of the political spectrum you were on. If you were a big phony and a hypocrite, he'd climb all over you. And he had these, and the denizens of Dogpatch basically represented the average American. Good-hearted, kind, but not terribly aware of what was going on around them. And but in the end, the good guy always wins. The average guy is the one who makes the right decisions in life and is triumphant. And this was a great strip. Another one, also from American Library of American Comics, I've always wanted to read from the beginning, and now because of Dean Mullaney's work, I can read this strip in its entirety, is Little Orphan Annie. If you only know Annie from the silly musical, man, you're missing a lot. This is just an epic strip with really engaging storylines that have, real stakes and real, challenges to your moral compass. Epic stories. There's an amazing story of Annie lost in the floods, the great floods of 1927, which washed away much of the state of Louisiana, and Harold Gray, in his very, very simple, scratchy pen and ink style, manages to convey the sense of isolation and horror and fear that these floods caused. And just terrific stuff. You do these long storylines that always paid off. It's also at times an extraordinarily violent strip. Punjab, who works for Daddy Warbucks, is a badass. Daddy Warbucks is a badass himself. He's not above picking up a machine gun and taking care of business. But my favorite character of the strip of all time was the Asp, who was sort of a mercenary gunman that Daddy Warbucks would call upon when the crap really hit the fan. And to Gray's credit, he didn't overuse the Asp. The arrival of the Asp on the scene was always, an event of celebration, I guess, for the readers. I know reading the strips in the collections, when you sense, things have gotten bad when the Asp is called upon, and the body count begins. It's just a terrific strip. And like I said, if you're only familiar with it from the musical, you don't even know 1% of the story. Just excellent stuff. It also helps me that Harold Gray was a far right wing conservative, and 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 had Daddy Warbucks and Little Orphan Annie and other characters speaking heresy during the New Deal years. Gray was not a fan of FDR. Then I find that amusing as well. Andrew Venables. You've written stories where a villain is the main character more than a few times. I'm thinking of Bane Conquest and General Grievous as examples. What are some of the pitfalls of writing a story for a bad guy? Do you deliberately try to avoid making them suddenly heroic? Do you walk a fine line, or just stick with character and trust the reader? Yeah, I mean, the biggest pitfall of writing a bad guy is making him just bad for the sake of being bad. That he doesn't have any true motivations. He doesn't have any, doesn't seem to have any fears or any of the normal human reactions that any of us have. And in creating Bane, I created a character, creating Bane along with Graham Nolan. This is his artwork here, gorgeous piece. We made sure that we created a character who was sympathetic, who was relatable, who had a tragic past. In Bane's mind, he is the victim. He's just trying to survive in a world that didn't give him a chance. He's raised in a hellhole, third world prison as a child. And what kind of monster is going to come out the other end of that? Well, you've got to feel for that child, even though, you would not want to run into the man in a dark alley. And yes, he's ruthless and all the rest of it, but we understand why. We don't excuse it, but we understand why. And it sets your moral compass spinning, which is always a good thing. If you watch The Sopranos, you watch shows like Dexter, you're constantly having to readjust how you feel about the character, and the stories make it thus. So you're being challenged. Breaking Bad is another example, where you're being challenged, because these are stories about bad guys, but you're drawn into sympathizing with them. But then events happen that make you realize, oh my God, they're monsters. I can't sympathize with them. I can't. They're terrible, terrible people. But that's the beauty of writing a solid, relatable bad guy. I did write Grievous. It's the only Star Wars thing I wrote. I didn't know much about Grievous. I didn't get to deal with his origin or anything. That might have been cool. I don't know if his origin was established. How did he end up in that suit? How much of his humanity is left? But he was pretty much just a bad guy for the sake of being bad. But you kind of understood, he's like, half machine, or like 80% machine at this point. And I guess that would piss anybody off. I was also involved heavily in I created the origin for the G.I. Joe villain Crake, who went on to become the new Cobra Commander. And that was a lot of fun. I think I got that assignment because of my Bane work. And, once again, another character with a terrible childhood who is turned into a evil incarnate. But like I said, you've always got to have a point at which you relate to the character. It's got to be something you like or admire or respect, or at least understand about the character. And I always use the example of the Hitchcock classic Rear Window. If you've never seen Rear Window, I'm about to spoil it for you. But Jimmy Stewart is a news photographer who breaks his leg, and he's in traction, and he's confined to his one-bedroom apartment, courtyard apartment in New York City. and he gets bored, and there was no internet then, and he no cell phones to play with, so he begins spying on his neighbors and basically following the story of their lives because he can see through their windows and see them in the courtyard, and he begins to suspect that one of his neighbors might have done away with his wife and buried her in the courtyard in the dead of night. And his suspicions grow and grow and grow until the murderer becomes aware of it, and the murderer, played by Raymond Burr, comes to visit Jimmy Stewart. And this is the moment we've been dreading the whole movie. But as Raymond Burr stands in the darkened entryway of Jimmy Stewart's apartment, and here's Jimmy Stewart, broken leg in a splint, in a wheelchair. He's never going to be able to defend himself. He's being confronted by his worst nightmare, this man that he's accused of murder and is convinced is a murderer. And we don't know much about Raymond Burr at this point because we've only seen him from Jimmy Stewart's, far away viewpoint. And this is the first time we're seeing him close up. And Hitchcock includes this great moment in which Raymond Burr stands in the dark and he says to Jimmy Stewart, "Why are you doing this to me?" And you realize that Burr feels he's been victimized. He's being victimized by this peeping Tom who can't stop, spying on him. And, of course, Burr goes on to try to kill Jimmy Stewart. But in that moment, you can feel for him. He's a figure of tragedy. And in your mind, you're throwing yourself back over the previous events of the story going, well, maybe he had a reason to kill his wife. Maybe he's not the bad guy in the story. And of course, in the ensuing next few moments, we learn, he's a bad guy. But in that one moment, we relate to him, and it makes it seem all the more real, and it makes just brings the whole movie into focus, and it's just a great moment in a great film. Another twin spin. Andrew Venables in the twin spin box, and he gets to ask another question, and it is, a while ago, you talked a little about James Cameron and how you rated True Lies as his best film. You said it's the only movie where the characters reacted in a credible way or having a normal human reaction. I loved Cameron's Terminator movies when I was younger, but I've liked them less and less over the years. I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Is it the dialogue, pretentious tone, or does every character behave so bizarrely that the very skeleton of it needs to be rewritten? I know you played in the Terminator sandbox in the 90s, where there's some indulgences the movies took that you actively sought to avoid. Yeah, I actively seek to avoid like most of what James Cameron does. The reason why True Lies worked for me, and Cameron fans are generally horrified at suggesting that this is his best movie. Largely, it's his best movie because it's adapted from another movie. It's adapted from a French film, so that the spine of the story and the relationships and everything else are all set in place. And it doesn't have the usual cast of Cameron unpleasant dilettante characters. And, I'm not taking anything away from Cameron. It took quite a bit of talent to make this work. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger playing the average dad is a stretch, but he makes it all work, and the humor works as it so often does not in a Cameron film, because the jokes are thrown away, the setups are so good, the cast is excellent. I mean, Jamie Lee Curtis and Arnold Schwarzenegger, against all odds, have a real chemistry in this film, and you really understand there's lots of surprises and twists and turns. And the movie isn't like your usual Cameron movie, which basically just gets off the blocks to head in one direction and heads unerringly in that direction for the next 2 hours. There's a lot of nuance and changes and reversals and things like that in this story. And but these are all largely absent in the rest of his work. Yes, Terminator was a great concept. It was a great concept when it was an Outer Limits episode in the early 60s. Cameron brings 1980s action movie sensibilities to it, but it's still the same story of a robotic soldier from the future being hunted by a human soldier from the future. And I like his Terminator movies better than any of the rest of his action output, but there are a lot of unpleasant characters in these stories that we're supposed to be able to relate to, but it's really hard to relate to John Connor in Terminator 2. I don't know if I want to blame Cameron's writing or the performer. I think Edward Furlong was miscast. He doesn't seem to read his lines right. He doesn't seem to have an arc. He always just talks like a pissy, pouty teenager all the time. And, that kind of turned me off. Aliens is another one. I mean, I loved this movie when I first saw it. Big comic book version of Ridley Scott's film. Just action and craziness and just insane. But as you point out, it's full of these pretentious characters. And also, we see Cameron's attitude toward anyone in uniform, any military person, is either, a macho asshole or just a mindless drone or just some sort of like a jock type. Cameron really doesn't like military people, and it comes out in his movies, in all of his movies in which there's a military presence. Even his screenplay for Rambo 2 shows a high level of disregard for American servicemen. And it's, I don't know if, he got beat up by some Marines at some point. I don't know. Maybe his dad was in uniform and was, didn't buy him a pony. I don't get it, but it's off-putting. And it kind of takes away from the action of Aliens that the colonial Marines who show up to fight this menace are so inept and so like self-involved that they don't really understand what's going on until it's too late. So I don't think that aspect. The Abyss is another movie that I really liked when I first saw it, but on subsequent viewings, the smugness and arrogance and pretension of the characters and the on the money dialogue over and over and over again. And once again, we have this unpleasant villain who's a serving American military guy. So yeah, I don't dig it. The Cameron stuff leaves me cold, and I'm with you. I liked it when I first saw it, but then when you start viewing it again, you see the cracks that begin to form. I've never seen Titanic, and I will certainly never see Avatar, which looks like a hate letter to the to the military. So I'm going to have to go on the ones I've seen, and yeah, I'm just not impressed generally with Cameron's output. Travis L.D. Murphy, what's your favorite Robert E. Howard Conan the Barbarian story? I dig me some Conan. As all of you well know, I have a Conan novel that's either been released by this point or is going to be released very imminently, called Siege of the Black Citadel. From Castalia House. My favorite, hands down, Jewels of Gwalar. It has everything you'd want in a Conan story. Lots of violence, the promise of sex, a monster, a creepy location, and that concluding scene with Conan on the bridge with the giant white ape thingy trying to kill him, and a raging river far below. It's this subterranean river. It's just such an amazing setting. But the coolest thing about the story is the moral quandary that it sets up for Conan, as he has to choose between saving a chest of gold or saving the girl who's been hanging out with him for the bulk of the story. It's a goodie. It's a goodie. It will always be my favorite, and it's a story that I first discovered when I was young spud, raging hormones, and found this Conan the Warrior Lancer paperback in a drugstore in Stone Harbor, New Jersey, and read it cover to cover in one afternoon, and went searching for the rest of the series. But yeah, this is where I first read Jewels of Gwalar, and if you've never read it, I would suggest you do. Strongly suggest you do. It's one of the better ones. I can't remember who did the comic adaptation, and that's a problem because if it was really really good, I would have remembered it. Richard Squire. Hey Chuck, this is more a story than a question. Well, I like a good story. I went into a comic shop near where I live now in California. And asked if they had any back issues of comics. And the owner of the store was happy to help until I told him what I was looking for, which was your run on Nightwing and Robin, to which he looked at me in disgust and told me that he didn't carry any of that and that I would be better off shopping somewhere else. I never knew that you were this despised by some people. I just took my leave thinking that it shouldn't matter who wrote a book. Who would think that they would want to sell back issues of all... You would think they would want to sell back issues of all kinds to make money. Sell back issues of all kinds to all kinds of people. That would be diverse, wouldn't it? Yeah, I can't explain the anger. I really don't, get it. I mean, does this store owner look into the political beliefs of every single one of the creators of the comics on his shelves? I mean, does he keep himself informed of who they voted for, or how they feel about nuclear proliferation or global warming? And then they base their buying habits on that. I mean, when someone comes in to sell them their comic book collection, do they weed through and go, I can't buy these comics? They're by a crypto fascist who I don't agree with. So they only buy back issues to sell, created by creators that share their political views. And how do they know that? Is there a score sheet? Is there a website that rates comic book creators by their wokeness? I don't know, and I don't understand the anger. Why would you be angry? You're running a comic shop. You'd think you'd try to be a little happier. And by not selling back issues, who is he hurting? by not selling particular, back issues, he's hurting himself. He's hurting you because you didn't get to buy them. You had to go someplace else. You know who he's not hurting? He's not hurting me. I don't make any money off of back issues. I wish I did. If I made money off of back issue sales, I'd be a multi-millionaire by now. But I don't make a dime. So him, putting a ban, blacklisting back issues featuring my name, hurts everybody but me. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do, my friend? Let's just never get that angry at anybody. I read books and comics and, watch movies and listen to music. I'm simply not concerned. Unless it becomes an issue in the person's work, I'm not going to buy some work that promotes principles or beliefs that I don't particularly share, but I'm perfectly willing to watch a piece of entertainment that might reflect in some way the beliefs or mindset of the creator, but I don't want to be lectured or pandered to, or proselytized to by any. It's not entertainment at that point to me. So I don't. I really don't care who you voted for if I like your music or I like the way you act or I like the stories that you write. It's simply irrelevant to me, and that's the way it should be. And it should be, my private thoughts and beliefs shouldn't impact anyone who consumes my work. Got to separate the art and the artist. Sometimes it's difficult because the artists are, loudmouths who insist that you listen to their screeds. But, other than that, who cares? Who cares? Hey, if you want to get a hold of me to discuss deep subject matter like that, or just ask me, who would win in a fight, Hulk or Thor, please don't ask me that. You can contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com is the most reliable way to reach me. I read all of these. All of the questions that I read this week, I found in emails on brunobookstore@gmail.com. Hunter Ninja Bear. Yeah, this book is back again. It's on Indiegogo. Hunter Ninja Bear, 360 page. Epic historical adventure by myself, Mel Ruby, Rob Hunter, and Ivan Nunez. It's from Phenom Comics. Yeah, that's 360 pages. It's on Indiegogo, and it's $30 for this big, honkin' doorstop of a graphic novel. And it's complete. You know, once the campaign is over, as people who indulged in the Kickstarter campaign will tell you, they had those books in their hands within 2 weeks. Once the campaign was over, those books were shipped, my friend, along with all the gewgaws and goodies and tchotchkes and extras that came along with it. So here's your second chance. If you missed it the first time, you go to Indiegogo.com, look for Hunter Ninja Bear, give it a look, and sign up. I promise you, you're going to enjoy it. And that's it for me this week. I want to thank you for listening, watching, subscribing, liking, spreading the word, and all the rest of it. And I'll see everyone down the road.